welcome to the December 2nd, 2020 Delaware Public Service Commission meeting. Commissioner Correa,
I am here.
welcome. Commissioner Conaway,
Present.
Gloria and I would like to extend our gratitude to you for your supply of Twizzlers. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Commissioner Drexler,
I am present.
Commissioner Gray.
Good afternoon, I'm here.
Thank you, Commissioner Gray. And we'd also like to thank you for your service as president of OPSI. And perhaps you'll be as lucky because we're also going to congratulate Mark Christie, who's now a commissioner, former judge, and former president of OPSI, just like you are now. So thank you for your service and best wishes with OPSI.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope you don't have any other ideas in that line of thinking.
Well, it'd probably be more important if a guy by the name of Joe had those ideas rather than Dallas. But we have the reading of the meeting minutes of November 18th, 2020. Does anyone have any corrections or changes or suggestions with respect to those minutes? Commissioner Correa.
I move that we adopt the minutes of 11/18/2020.
I second. Drexler.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Commissioner Correa.
Yes.
Commissioner Conaway.
Yes.
Commissioner Drexler.
Aye.
Commissioner Gray.
Aye.
And I vote aye. The motion carries. The consent agenda, we have 7 items on the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Commissioner Conaway so moves.
Second from Commissioner Gray.
Is there any discussion on Commissioner Conaway's motion to approve the consent agenda? Hearing none, all those, Commissioner Correa,
Yes.
Commissioner Conaway,
Aye.
Commissioner Drexler,
Aye.
Commissioner Gray,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well, and the motion carries. The regular agenda, number 1, is in the matter of the application of the Vanguard Group pertaining to the disclaimer of control of certain public utilities. I believe that we have Mr. Michael Maxwell, who represents Vanguard First, ready to announce their position on this matter. Mr. Maxwell.
Yes, thank you, Commissioners. Good afternoon. As stated, my name is Mike Maxwell. I'm an attorney with Potter, Anderson, and Caroon, and I'm here on behalf of Vanguard Group, Inc. in connection with this application today in front of the Commission. I'm joined today by my colleagues Matt O'Toole and Ryan Merritz, and I'm also joined by representatives from Vanguard, and I would ask at this time that they introduce themselves, maybe doing so in alphabetical order by last name for efficiency's sake.
Hi, this is Judy Gaines. I'm an associate counsel at the Vanguard Group.
Hi, this is Janine Corpex. I am a legal analyst at the Vanguard Group.
And this is Pauline Scalvino. I'm a principal, which is our designation of officer for Vanguard. And my area of responsibility, I'm in our global risk and security division. And my specific area of responsibility relates to our tracking of the various state and federal limits on how much our funds can invest in and our management of processes such as this one.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Judy, Janine, and Pauline. The application we think speaks for itself, and we're happy to address any questions the commissioners may have about it. We do, however, want to address at this time one inaccuracy that was brought to our attention late last night and that we have brought to the attention of Commission counsel and staff, and for which we've submitted today an amendment to the application. We've corrected a statement in the application to the effect that Vanguard holds proxy voting authority for Vanguard advised funds, but in fact each of the Vanguard advised funds has retained proxy voting authority. We don't think the amendment to the application changes the substantive analysis or
Excuse me,
affects anything in the
Mr.
proposed.
Maxwell, Mr. Maxwell,
Sure.
you're doing a great job, but I just want to advise you, if you would pretend like you're from Texas and slow down a little bit, it would be helpful for our court reporter.
Yeah, certainly. I apologize. As I was stating, we've corrected a statement in the application to the effect that Vanguard holds proxy voting authority for Vanguard advised funds. While in fact each of these Vanguard advised funds has retained proxy voting authority, and we don't think the amendment that we submitted today to the application changes the substantive analysis or affects anything in the proposed form of order. If anything, we do think that the further disaggregation of the voting authority may make the analysis a little bit easier, as voting decisions are made on a fund-by-fund basis rather than collectively. I do also want to note that Vanguard is at varying stages of seeking similar approvals from regulatory commissions in other states, so this is not just something that's being done here in Delaware. Finally, I also want to note that we've worked with commission staff in preparing the draft final order, and upon resolution of any questions from the commission, we would respectfully request that the commission adopt the order. And I do want to thank the commissioners for their time and attention to this matter. We're grateful for the professionalism and the courtesy of the commission staff, in particular, Mr. O'Brien and Mr. Hardigan. And I guess now at this time, we and the Vanguard representatives are happy to address any questions that you may have. Thank you.
We'll wait for questions till the end, Mr. Maxwell. Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair Winslow. Bill O'Brien on behalf of staff in this matter. So yes, we'd ask you to approve proposed order number 9691, which would approve the disclaimer of control portion of Vanguard's application, meaning that the 10% threshold in the statute under Section 215 that guides the commission on whether or not there's a change of control of a regulated public utility that requires approval, whether or not they need to apply to come in for that change of control. So what Vanguard did here was they asked for a finding that rebuts the presumption at 10% and essentially lifts it to 20% for a particular type of ownership that they hold through their mutual funds. And in the alternative, they asked that if there was a change of control, that the commission simply approve the change of control. But what this order does is it takes the first part and says, yes, Vanguard, you have rebutted the presumption of control in your application, and we have based this finding on the following factors. And if any of those factors change, Vanguard, you need to come in and let us know so we can revisit this approval of the disclaimer of control. Staff did analyze the application. We also looked at the amendment that was filed today and agree that if anything, it means that Vanguard has even less control than what they had represented in the original application. So we do not think that affects the order. Now, there is one thing. We did go ahead and amend the order very slightly that you got in your package last week. Based on the amendment that was filed today, we did just add the language in the first whereas clause to reflect that the application was amended on December 2nd, 2020. But that's the only change in the order that you got last week. There's nothing else that changes based on the amendment made today. So in summary, we do think that based on the factors represented by Vanguard in its application, that they have rebutted that presumption at 10% and that they should be allowed, at least under the way it's described in this order, to own up to the percentages delineated in the order based on the manner that they hold that ownership through the various Vanguard funds. The commission staff would simply ask that you approve order number 9691. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Ms. Iori.
Thank you, Chairman Winslow and Commissioners. The public advocate had the opportunity to review the original draft of the order. I only saw the letter from Mr. Maxwell about 15 minutes ago and have not seen the proposed form of order that has been changed pursuant to Mr. O'Brien's description. So the public advocate will not take a position on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Iori. Commissioners, do you have any questions of the parties? May we have a motion, please?
This is Drexler. I move that we approve order number 9691 as amended, specifically in the second paragraph, the second whereas clause, adding the date of 12/2/2020.
This is Commissioner Karia. I second it.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Commissioner Correa,
Yes.
Commissioner Conaway,
Aye.
Commissioner Drexler,
Aye.
Commissioner Gray,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. The motion carries. Mr. Maxwell, you did a very nice job. Thank you for your representation. And Ms. Gaines, Kurpex, and Delvino, thank you for attending, and I hope you enjoyed your slight contact with the state of Delaware. Number two on
Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Number two on the calendar is in the matter of the application of Delmarva Power and Light Company for an increase in electric base rates and other miscellaneous tariff changes. Mr. Geddes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Before you today is staff and the DPA's motion to strike certain portions of Delmarva's rebuttal testimony because it raises a new rate-making issue in its rebuttal testimony for the first time without any opportunity for staff and the DPA and the other parties to meaningfully respond to it. The issue should find a new home in the next case that Delmarva files. It's too late to accommodate the issue in the pending docket. As far as I know, dating back to at least docket 8122, the first Delmarva Electric case that I worked on, this commission has always normalized storm-related damages for rate-making purposes. Nothing in Delmarva's prior litigated rate cases, including the last one, docket 170977, indicates any deviation from the commission's historical rate-making treatment for storm damages. And this is primarily because storm-related damages are an expense. They are involved in the day-to-day operations of the utility, and they are not a rate base item upon which the General Assembly, under 26 Del Code Section 102(3), permits a return. Also, these types of expenses are normalized because of the large fluctuations in amounts included in this expense category. In the last 5 cases dating back to 2011, the 3-year averages have varied from a high of $15.9 million in docket 11528 to a low in docket 160649 of $1.2 million. As the chart on this boy's rebuttal testimony indicates, between 2012 and 2017, there was only one storm. So that was a 5-year period with only one storm, and I also would note that there were no hurricanes between Sandy and Jose, which brushed the east coast of Delaware. The average in the current case is $4.6 million. The company admits that this is a new rate-making adjustment, being sponsored for the first time 7 months after the case was filed. As Mr. Zeminski states on page 6 of his rebuttal testimony, Adjustment 31 was not proposed in the company's direct case nor in the supplemental direct filing, or in the additional supplemental direct filing, that's 3 filings in this case made so far, nor were staff and the DPA alerted to this adjustment or the need for any modification of the test period information for storm damages prior to the rebuttal filing. Because it was raised in the rebuttal filing, it thereby prevents staff and the DPA and other parties from addressing the issue in direct pre-filed written testimony. Thus, the company suggests that the significant storm damage regulatory asset is ripe for inclusion in the pending case, and that now is the time to litigate this case. Staff believes is somewhat rich, or as the Australians would say, quite cheeky, given that there is no provision in the schedule for joining the issue with direct testimony of the other parties who might take an opposite position on the proposed rate-making adjustment or what impact it should have on the proposed cost of capital. The company suggests that staff and the DPA are free to argue against the creation of a reg asset, but that is not quite the same as being able to file opposing testimony and presenting both sides of the issue to the commission rather than just one side of the argument. That is why the minimum filing requirements make no provision for new issues to be raised in rebuttal testimony except when extraordinary circumstances exist or justice so warrants it. I would suggest to you that an increase in test period O&M expenses for the rate effective period is not one of those circumstances and should not be allowed here. As this commission has stated many times in its prior decisions, the rate-making calculus requires a balance between investment, expenses, and return. Cherry-picking certain expense categories for increases without balancing all elements in the calculus leads to skewed results. That is one of the reasons why this commission historically has relied on average rate base to set rates for Delmarva's customers rather than on year-end rate base numbers. In this case, establishing a new regulatory asset would have an impact on the overall business risk of the company and potentially on the appropriate rate of return that should be established by this commission. That is why this new rate-making adjustment should find no place in this case, and the joint motion should be granted. To do otherwise is to make a mockery of the minimum filing requirements that try to balance the interests of the various parties and provide you, the commission, with issues that are fairly presented and fully developed, so that in turn, your decision is fully informed. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Mr. Geddes, thank you very much for your comments. I think, however, it's highly unusual for someone to have the applause in the background like that. Was that an Australian influence?
It might be. I do live with an Australian.
I was referring to the dog. I'm not sure whose dog it was.
No, it wasn't my dog.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes it is. It's not my dog.
Okay, because I thought maybe he was applauding your comments. Okay, Ms. Iori.
Thank you, Chairman Winslow and Commissioners. I will not repeat what Mr. Geddes argued, but I would add 2 things. First, the provision in the minimum filing requirements that would allow a utility to bring up something in rebuttal, it's not an either or, it's an and. So the utility must show extraordinary circumstances and the interests of justice so require, not or. So the commission would have to find both. Now, we argued in our papers, and I'm sure the commission has read them, why why first, these are not extraordinary circumstances because storm damages expenses are a recurring thing in a utility's existence. The only issue here is the amount of them and when they occurred in the process. But the second is that the interests of justice so require. And I think we explained in our papers why the interests of justice do not favor Delmarva in this case. They favor the DPA and staff. And I can certainly address those very quickly if the commission would like, but, you know, as I said, I assume you've read our papers, and so I don't want to, you know, prolong this.
Thank you, Ms. Iori. Ms. Courtney Schultz?
Good afternoon, Commissioners, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you today to address this matter. At the outset of this presentation, I would briefly just like to mention that while it's slightly unclear to me whether the Commission is going to be in a position to decide the motion on the merits today, which is, my clarity is really based on the fact that the company's response and staff and DPA's reply to the motion were only provided to you yesterday at our request, and that there's no proposed order for approval today. That said, you know, we would have preferred for the hearing examiner to retain and resolve this motion for the sake of continuity, but we're here today and we're prepared to proceed with our position. And so what you've heard and what you've read from staff and DPA is that this is a new rate-making issue and that it's too late, or that the MFRs don't necessarily presume to provide Delmarva with a platform to introduce this matter now. And respectfully, Delmarva believes that the MFR does provide for the proper avenue for this commission to address this issue at this time and in this rate case where it does belong. And that is really based on the fact that the MFR was designed to allow utilities and other parties to deal with subsequent issues that may arise during the investigation of the application. Respectfully, that's exactly what happened here. Delmarva is not introducing a new issue. They are introducing an adjustment. And they are essentially looking to modify their rate base through this adjustment. The fact that the proposed adjustment raises a new issue doesn't change the fact that it is in fact a proposed modification to the company's test period data, which falls squarely into the exceptions permitted under Section 1002-1.3.1. Therein, the Commission is permitted to allow the utility to offer into evidence this modification that is being contemplated through the introduction of what I will call the SSVRA, as I talk today, which is the Significant Storm Damage Regulatory Asset that is proposed. So what is Delmarva asking for permission to do in its rebuttal testimony as it relates to storms? We are not asking to change our test period storm expense, which continues to be normalized over a 3-year period as reflected in adjustment number 10 to the company's revenue requirement. What we are modifying is the rate base to include post-test period O&M expenses for reasonably known and measurable changes relating to what we call the August significant storms, which are Tropical Storm Isaias and the Tornado Straight Line Wind event. And this is being done through adjustment number 31, which, as Mr. Geddes stated and as Mr. Zeminski stated in his testimony, is a new adjustment related to these, which adjusts the rate base. In addition, we're asking to create a regulatory asset to track the August significant storm expenses and future significant storm expenses for inclusion in our next rate case. What's different, of course, is that currently all storm expenses, regardless of magnitude of storm, are normalized over a 3-year period and included in the revenue requirement. The company is proposing that the Commission allow it to instead only normalize non-significant storm O&M expenses in base rates in its next base rate case, and to otherwise track these significant expenses, as I stated earlier, between August 2020 and the next rate case. And that would be done via the regulatory asset amortized over 3 years with the amortized balance included in rate base. This will actually benefit customers. It's in the interest of judicial economy to deal with this issue in this rate case. If the Commission approves this rate-making treatment in this case, the company will be able to separate out significant storm expenses in future base rate cases, which will enable the company to ensure that rates more appropriately reflect the actual costs incurred during the rate effective period. The companies also proposed to pause the SSDRA amortization until the next base rate case, so that customers will not experience the full effect of the August significant storms in rates now. But quite frankly, we're not here today to argue the propriety of the regulatory asset. Rather, that should be determined by the hearing examiner during the hearing of this case. The company is well aware of the current precedent, and whether DPA or staff would have preferred that Delmarva propose a different treatment for these expenses is also irrelevant. We can't rely on what DPA and staff say that they may not have taken issue with. It seems unlikely, given the contentious nature of this proceeding to date, that staff and DPA would have simply allowed Delmarva to do something else, which it had never been done before. And by that, I mean the suggestion to include post-test period storms expense outside of the 3-year normalization period and its O&M expense adjustment in this case. In addition, as we get to the point that Ms. Iori made, which is that the Commission, in order to allow this modification in the rebuttal testimony, has to find extraordinary circumstances and that the interests of justice so warrant. The company could not have submitted this tailored proposal sooner than it did. There was no bait and switch, no ill motive, no intent to drag its feet. Staff and DPA claim that the company could have and should have made the request for this reg asset in their direct testimony or earlier. It's not the relevant inquiry. It's not dispositive. The creation of this reg asset wasn't ripe until the August significant storms occurred and the level of O&M expenses were known. And what I think that staff and DPA both ignore is that without having the data available to it, the company wasn't in a position to offer a well-thought-out and tailored plan. Using a straw argument here simply wouldn't have worked. And that's really evidenced by the fact that the company didn't just take its position on this regulatory asset and say, well, we're just going to create a major event category. That wouldn't have been sufficient, and quite frankly, it wouldn't have covered both of the storms that occurred in August, which together had O&M expenses of $16.4 million. And so ultimately, we think that the Commission should allow the company's request as timely. There are extraordinary circumstances here. The issue here is the ability to create this regulatory asset with the data that was known. And ultimately, we knew that data quite literally as we were preparing rebuttal testimony. There was no ability to prepare this and send it off earlier in time, nor did the company think it would be an issue that would rise to the level that it has, quite frankly. Whether we could have made a phone call before, I guess that we could have, but again, that's not dispositive either here. The regulatory team on our side needed to have an opportunity to analyze and assess the options for recovery of the unprecedented costs, which they did, and the additional testimony on this issue was provided at the time that it was known. Because these known and measurable post-test period expenses are not otherwise includable in the test period storms expense, without the company's proposal to track and defer these costs that's been provided in rebuttal testimony, the company would need to file another rate case earlier than it otherwise would, simply to ensure that these August storm expenses could be included in a test period normalization looking back 3 years. And according to testimony in this case, the company's been taking advantage of the DSIC mechanism to timely recover reliability investments, which are really the primary driver of rate filings. And this increase in time does benefit customers, so it's not really in anybody's interest to force this issue out of this case. The interests of justice support the company's introduction of its proposal, simultaneous with rebuttal testimony. In fact, the DPA and staff would agree with us that there is practicality in addressing this issue in this case. That is something that was mentioned in their reply brief, that it would be more practical to address the issue in this case. They then conclude that practicality can't trump the alleged prejudice, but quite frankly, we don't see the prejudice Their allegations on why it's inappropriate is that their consultants have not to exceed contracts, that Mr. Watkins was unavailable, and quite frankly, all of these reasons, these proffered reasons, kind of fall away when you look at the logistics and the mechanisms in the MFRs. I mean, quite literally, the company could have filed supplemental direct testimony one day or 1 week prior to the rebuttal. If that had happened, the consultants would still be, quote, working for free. But quite frankly, I think these are experienced consultants. The parties are all experienced. The parties understand and know that issues do arise. The TCJA is one example of that. And sometimes they're late in the game through nobody's fault, quite frankly. Neither is how DPA and staff consultants spent their time during the case relevant, whether it's discovery or preparing rebuttal or working on the motions to compel that have been involved in this case. I think everybody just needs to plan for issues that arise later in the proceeding. The company did offer solutions in this case, so staff's concerned that they wouldn't have an opportunity to file testimony before the commission in advance of the hearing. The company offered to give them live oral rebuttal. We also offered to have them do written rebuttal as well. So the written option is on the table if it's understood that there needs to be some sort of memorialization here. So I think there are solutions to this problem, but the solution is not to strike a testimony. In conclusion, the inclusion of the August significant storm expenses and rate base in this case allows the company only a return on its investment. It is delaying its right to a return of its investment until the next base rate case, and dealing with this issue now is in the interest of judicial economy. It's consistent with the company's regulatory goals for filing cases as infrequently as possible, aligns with the goals of the Delaware legislature through the passage of district, and is beneficial for the company and its customers. Exceptional circumstances warranted the company's filing of this request simultaneous with its rebuttal testimony in this case, and the company respectfully requests that the commission deny DPA and staff's motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schultz.
Chairman Winslow, may I have a brief rebuttal?
Yes, I was just about ready to call.
Staff would like a rebuttal as well.
I was about ready to call Mr. Geddes for a rebuttal.
I would defer to Mr. Geddes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Starting at the end of counsel's argument, I think it is important to note that with the DISC legislation, the capital costs associated with this particular storm is being recovered separately. The only issue here is O&M expense associated with the storm. And as I stated initially in my comments, there is no precedent in this state for O&M expenses to be given rate-based treatment. None, zero, nada. And the Delmarva has not cited any precedent or any authority that would allow or should contravene the commission's normal way of dealing with O&M expenses to recover them, at least with regard to storms, on a normalized basis. To suggest that this is not a significant modification of the commission's traditional way of dealing with these categories of expenses is strange credulity. I just cannot believe that someone with a straight face can say that this is just, a mere modification. And the timing of it, I mean, this is 2 bites at the apple rather than 1. Clearly the company says they want to keep their normalization expense traditions, but now they want to have this to, be on top of that normal recovery of O&M expenses. There's no precedent for it. There's no need for it. And the timing of rate cases and how Delmarva files them is clearly up to them. If they believe that this expense is so dramatic that it requires another case, they can file a case. They can file a single issue case. But there's no assurance that if we follow the traditions and the precedents of this commission, that Delmarva's next case will not be filed either earlier or later than it otherwise would be. Thank you.
Mr. Geddes, doesn't her argument about judicial efficiency have some merit? And also, what's the additional expense going to be if we have to hear this as a specific issue case?
With regard to efficiency, yes, that is an issue, but prejudice is an issue as well. And we should have the right to file testimony on the issue. As I stated, it may, and I think it would, have an impact on the cost of capital. It clearly has an impact on the risk that the company faces, which implicitly affects the cost of capital. So you would have to have that testimony adjusted, or at least the ability to respond to it as well. So in weighing the efficiency versus the prejudice, remember the ratepayers, staff, and DPA and the other parties are the ones who are trying to protect the ratepayers' interests here, and it's just not fair to have this come in at the last minute without a proper opportunity to respond to it.
It's my understanding from the argument that they gave you what they believe to be a proper avenue to respond to this issue or issues.
I'm sorry, could you state that again? I dropped my earpiece.
It's my understanding from Delmarva's argument that they have suggested ways to address the issue of you all addressing the issues they're raising up in rebuttal.
That is correct, but caveat or the additional commission that Ms. Schultz did not mention was that they don't want any extension in the schedule, and staff doesn't either. This case has gone on too long, and we're scheduled to file rebuttal testimony on the 11th. As I said, it's just not the O&M expense. It has collateral issues as well, and it's just too late in this case. There's no extraordinary circumstances because an O&M expense in the rate effective period may increase. As I indicated, if you look at the variations in this cost component in the various cases that I cited, it has fluctuated from a high of 15 million to a low of 1.6. So the normalization going forward will be higher. And that's just the way we've collected this expense for the last 40 years. There's nothing in this case that indicates that it should be collected in any different manner than it has been over the last 40 years.
Commissioners?
Chairman Winslow, may I be heard, or?
Yes, you can, and we're going to make sure you're heard, because if we don't, you're going to make sure we hear you. So I just want to make sure if the commissioners have any follow-up questions on my questions, and if they don't, then we're going to have you give us some more information, please.
Mr. Chair, I have some questions, Commissioner Gray, but I am prepared to wait until I hear the input from Ms. Iori.
Okay, Ms. Iori?
Thank you, Chairman Winslow and Commissioners. I'm not going to belabor these points, but I think that they are important. Delmarva says, you heard excuse me, you heard Delmarva's counsel say a lot of things weren't dispositive, and maybe not one by itself, but together they all are, and they are entirely relevant to the issue that there are extraordinary circumstances and the interests of justice so require. Now, what Ms. Stewart didn't tell you, I'm sorry, not Ms. Stewart, what Delmarva didn't tell you is that they asked the commission to allow it to create a regulatory asset for storm damage expense in docket 170977, which was their last rate case. And you may not remember how it came about, but what happened in that case was there was a phase 2. And phase 2 was to address only staff's proposed adjustment on the jurisdictional allocations, that is, allocations among the states versus allocations between, say, Delmarva's Gas in Delaware and Delmarva's Electric in Delaware. And part of that, and Mr. Geddes can probably explain this a little better than me because it was his issue, but part of that adjustment, there was a discussion as to whether there was apples to apples because Delmarva in Maryland the Maryland Commission, did create a regulatory asset for storm damage expense. That's their rate-making treatment for it. But in Delaware, there is no regulatory asset treatment. It is treated as an operating expense, which it absolutely is, and it's normalized. And it's normalized based on a 3-year average of what Delmarva has incurred. So, in any event, the hearing examiner, in his proposed findings and recommendations, which were submitted to the commission in February of this year, which was a month before Delmarva filed its rate case, the hearing examiner addressed an issue that wasn't presented to him, and he said that he recommended that the commission create a regulatory asset for storm damage expenses. And in their exception, and I put that in quotes because they really didn't accept to the hearing examiner's recommendation, Delmarva pushed the commission to accept that recommendation of the hearing examiner. And staff and the DPA objected. We did file true exceptions. We accepted to that recommendation, and the commission said, we're not going to address it in this case. It wasn't presented, and so Delmarva could have made that same adjustment, proposed that same adjustment in its rate case in this, this current rate case, regardless of the fact that they didn't know if they were even going to have any storm damage expense. Because at the time that they were pushing it in February of 2020, they didn't know they were going to have any storm damage expense either. So the argument that they couldn't possibly have known until it actually happened, and then they had to wait and see exactly how much it was going to be, is belied by their previous submissions to the commission, in which they exhorted the commission to adopt the hearing examiner's recommendation that storm damages be taken out of ordinary operating expenses and that a regulatory asset be created for them so that they get to recover the damages, the expense, and a return on it. So I would ask you to consider that in considering whether Delmarva has established the extraordinary circumstances and the interests of justice. We would suggest that they have not. With respect to Delmarva's statement that including the issue in this case would be consistent with the company's goal of filing as few rate cases as possible, I don't think you can really guesstimate when the company is going to file its next rate case. I would also note, and we did note this in our reply papers, that Exelon's chief executive officer, Mr. Crane, told on a earnings call in November, said that Exelon's goal was to increase earnings by increasing rate base. And I think you've seen that in the last several cases that Delmarva has filed. Their rate base has increased considerably. And in any event, the company's goals should not be guiding this commission. The commission is guided by what it says in the minimum filing requirements. What it says in the minimum filing requirements is that any changes such as that Delmarva is proposing here are to be made before rebuttal testimony, and that they can only be made in rebuttal testimony if the company establishes extraordinary circumstances and the interests of justice so require. We would respectfully submit that they have not established extraordinary circumstances because they could have filed or could have requested this particular rate-making treatment in their case, or they could have requested it in the first supplemental testimony that they filed or the second supplemental testimony that they filed, both of which were filed before the staff and DPA filed their direct testimony. And I would only note in this that the public advocate did make a recommendation with respect to Delmarva's proposed rate-making treatment for the storm damage expenses or for the normalization of them. The company used 3 years, which the commission has used for several years, and the DPA suggested that it be 5 years in this case. That was an issue that the hearing examiner, we would have litigated, and the hearing examiner would have made a proposed findings and recommendations to you, and you would have taken up when you heard the parties at oral argument. So to say that, and finally, to say that everyone needs to plan for issues that may arise, that's easy for Delmarva to say because it gets to recover its rate case expense from ratepayers. Staff and the DPA don't have that luxury. While they bill Delmarva for the cost of its consultants, OMB, state's OMB doesn't care about that. We have a not-to-exceed contract, and that is it. They don't care if we get to recover from somebody else. So to say that it's okay to make our consultants work for free when Delmarva's people don't have to work for free on an issue that they knew about and could have raised at the beginning of this case is, I mean, for lack of a better word, chutzpah. Thank you, and I'm available. If your commissioners have any questions, I'm happy to address them.
Thank you, Ms. Iori.
Commissioner.
Yes, ma'am. Is this Ms. Schultz?
Commissioner, this is Ms. Schultz. I'm going to venture to guess you won't give me an opportunity to respond, but on the event that you do, I would like to make a few points.
Well, let me just make a comment. I think that Ms. Iori spoke for quite a long period of time. And although it was a little unusual, I think that if you take a short 2 minutes to hit the high spots, that might sort of even things out.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I will be brief. With regards to what we've heard just now on precedent, simply because it hasn't been done before doesn't mean that it can't be done and that somebody can't propose to do something different. Yes, the issue was broached in phase 2. Ultimately, the commission determined in its order with respect to the exceptions in the docket 19077 that the regulatory asset treatment for the storm's expense as set forth by the hearing examiner in phase 2 was inappropriate in that context. In the argument before the commission in that case, I do believe that Ms. Iori actually said that the company could propose it in a future rate case, but just not in that proceeding. It was inappropriate in the context. With respect to precedent for regulatory assets, the AMI and CTA are both in that category, so it's not as if there are no regulatory assets. And in fact, for AMI, I understand that the incremental O&M was deferred and included in and given rate-based treatment. With respect to separating out the proceedings, again, I will just reiterate, it does not make any sense to do a new and separate proceeding for this limited issue, which really should be part and parcel of this case. With respect, finally, to the DPA's 2 arguments on whether or not the company could have included this earlier, I spoke at length on that earlier, which I won't touch on, but if memory serves, both the company's first and second supplemental direct testimonies occurred before the August storms did. I may be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure. The point is, we didn't know what we know when we knew it, and we put our position out there as soon as we possibly could. Finally, with respect to the proposal in witness Watkins' testimony regarding changing the normalization to 5 years, that's, not necessarily for any commission consideration or discussion today, but that still doesn't capture the post-test period storms, which is what we're dealing with at this stage of the game. And so finally, just as a reminder, we're not asking the commission to decide today whether or not the treatment that the company has proposed is proper. That will come before you in the future after the hearing examiner decides the issue as part of this case, which we believe that it should. Thank you very much for the 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to follow the arguments, and on the one hand, I get the impression that before this rate case, when we had this, the tax relief plan, we seemed to instruct the utility to factor into this rate moving forward in the revenue requirement, the impacts of that tax change. But it sounds in this case as though we've come through a process that has established precedent in terms of timing and milestones, and that as we move further into that timeline, there appears to have been some scope creep, and I could get this wrong. But I've heard from Mr. Geddes that there are concerns about the impacts of taking the approach the utility is proposing, because there are issues, in my view, debt equity ratios, the potential impacts on interest rates. And so in a way, I tend to agree with the DPA and staff. It seems like we don't and haven't allowed all the stakeholders to examine where the right balance is here. So, and insofar as no party seems willing to extend the duration of the case, then I would be prepared to make a motion that the commission adopt a motion to strike.
Is there a second to the motion?
Drexler, second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Correa?
Yay.
Commissioner Conaway?
Aye.
Commissioner Drexler?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
I abstain. The motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, the next item on the calendar, I believe, is number 3, which is in the matter of the application of Delmarva Power and Light Company for an increase in natural gas base rates. Ms. Scott.
Thank you, Chair Winslow. Pam Scott here on behalf of Delmarva Power and Light Company. This is a joint motion on behalf of Delmarva Commission staff and the Delaware Division of Public Advocate to revoke the designation of the hearing examiner in connection with our gas-based rate case. The parties have reached a settlement in this case, and we are proposing as a result of that settlement that we present the form of settlement agreement to the commission at its hearing, its first public hearing in January.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Mr. O'Brien?
Thank you, Chair Winslow and Commissioners. Bill O'Brien on behalf of staff. Yes, that is correct. We agree with Ms. Scott's summary of the motion. So yes, the good news is that we do have an agreement in principle in a case that involved many issues and was subject to many rounds of discovery. So I would think it's very good news that we have reached an agreement. But in order to get to a final order more quickly, the parties have decided to ask the commission to conduct the evidentiary hearing directly. We did this earlier in the Suez rate case, and I believe it worked well there. So we would have a proposed order for you at the time of the January 6th hearing. But yes, staff joins in this motion and would ask the commission to adopt Order 9693.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Brien. Ms. Iori?
Thank you, Chairman Winslow and Commissioners. The Public Advocate is one of the joint movements. We do support the motion. We thank staff and Delmarva for the negotiations that led to what we think will be a very good settlement, and we think that the Commission will approve it once it gets to you. And so we do support the motion and ask that you enter the order. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Iori. Commissioners, Mr. Walsh is our representative on this matter. If anybody has any questions of him, right now, though, do you have any questions of the parties? Commissioner Conaway?
I move that we adopt proposed order number 9693.
I second Drexler.
Is there any discussion on the motion to approve proposed order number 9693? Hearing none, Commissioner Correa?
Aye.
Commissioner Conaway?
Aye.
Commissioner Drexler?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
And I vote aye. The motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Ms. Scott.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Number 4, in the matter of the request for approval of Delmarva Power and Light Company's 2021 Energy Efficiency Surcharge Rider rate. And the commission is going to be informed on this application by Ms. Dawn Kurtz-Crompton, Delmarva Power Light.
Thank you, Chair Winslow and Commissioners. Good afternoon. This is Dawn Kurtz-Crompton on behalf of Delmarva Power and Light Company. As the Commission may recall, on August 18th, 2017, Delmarva Power filed an application with the Commission requesting approval of its proposed energy efficiency program, which consisted of a behavior-based program, as well as a consumer products program, which included lighting, appliance rebates, and appliance recycling components. The energy efficiency application had been approved by the Delaware Energy Efficiency Advisory Council and was assigned docket 17-0985 after being filed. EPA intervened in the matter, and staff also participated, and additional motions for intervention were approved for DENREC and Chesapeake Utilities. In August 2019, staff, DPA, and Delmarva Power finalized a settlement in docket 17-0985, and as part of that settlement agreement, the parties agreed to a rate recovery mechanism, namely the Energy Efficiency Surcharge Rider Rate, also known as the Rider EE rate. The Commission approved of that settlement on September 12, 2019, via Order 9453. On October 31, 2019, in accordance with the requirements of ordering Paragraph 12 and Exhibit B, Paragraph 5 of Order 9453 in docket 17-0985, Delmarva filed proposed revisions to the company's electric tariff necessary to implement the Rider EE rate for year 1. This year, on October 29, 2020, Delmarva filed an application for a change to the Rider EE surcharge rate for year 2 in accordance with Order 9453. On November 9, 2020, pursuant to discussions with staff, Delmarva resubmitted its application in order to open a new docket, and the application was assigned docket number 20-0739. The November 9 filing did not adjust the rate proposed in the original October 29 filing. Today, you have been presented with Order 9694 in docket number 20-0739. If approved, Order 9694 would formally open the docket and approve the tariff and rates set forth in Delmarva's recent application for the 2021 Energy Efficiency Surcharge Rider rate. As set forth in the order, the monthly bill impact of the proposed tariff changes results in a proposed increase of approximately 38 cents or an increase of 0.31% for a typical residential non-space heating customer using 845 kilowatt hours on an annual average basis. By and through Order 9694, those rates would be approved on a temporary basis and subject to refund following staff review, public notice, and the Commission's final approval. I thank staff for preparing the proposed order and for allowing Delmarva the opportunity to comment on the order. Delmarva is in agreement with the form of order presented to you today and respectfully requests the Commission approve Order number 9694 as submitted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kurtz-Crompton. Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair Winslow. Bill O'Brien on behalf of staff. Staff agrees with Ms. Kurtz-Crompton's summary of their application and the proposed order. This is an opening order, as Ms. Kurtz-Crompton explained, which would approve the rates on a temporary basis, subject to refund, directs the company to publish notice, and allows staff time to fully investigate the application. Staff does join with Delmarva and asks you to adopt Order 9694. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Ms. Iori.
Thank you, Chairman Winslow and Commissioners. The public advocate has nothing to add to what you've already heard and supports the proposed order.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Ms. Iori. Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Gray.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I move that the commission adopt order number 9694 submitted.
I second the motion.
Is there any comment or discussion with respect to the motion? Hearing none, Commissioner Correa.
Aye.
Commissioner Conaway.
Aye.
Commissioner Drexler.
Aye.
Commissioner Gray.
Aye.
And I also vote aye. The motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Kurtz-Crompton and Mr. O'Brien. And Ms. Iori, obviously. Number 5, in the matter of the provision of standard offer supply to retail consumers in the service territory of Delmarva Power and Light Company. And we have, as our distinguished visitor, hopefully on the line, and I believe that Jenny Board from staff will make the presentation.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Winslow and Commissioners. Delmarva held its first tranche auctions for the standard offer service delivery year 2021 on Monday, November 30th. We have on the call today Dr. Jim Letzelter, representing Liberty Consultant Group, who is the Commission's technical monitoring consultant. He will review the market conditions and present the results of this auction. There are 2 versions of the presentation, a public version and a confidential version. First, Dr. Letzelter will give his public presentation. Then, if you desire to hear about the detailed bids and bidders, you will need to enter into executive session for the confidential presentation. Over to you, Dr. Letzelter.
Yes, greetings, Chairman Winslow and Commissioners. It's always a pleasure.
Dr. Letzelter, I have a question for you. You know, this pandemic's going to be over with, and we like seeing you here in Delaware, but what is your thinking with respect to the possibility of not having, I think you're from Virginia, right?
Actually, I'm originally a New Yorker, but I've since transplanted myself to Florida.
Okay, so you would be coming from where if you were to testify in person at the commission in the future?
Well, I would be coming from St. Petersburg, Florida, to do that, and I would be glad to do it.
Well, no, I understand that. In terms of expenses for the staff, would it be less expensive if you did testify as you're doing today by Zoom or some other fashion?
I believe it could be, and it makes sense that it would be, and I'm glad to follow up with staff on that subject to see what makes sense.
Okay. Would you please give us your presentation?
Hey, thank you. If you could please move to page 2 of the presentation.
It's on our board. I guess you're seeing that where you are, though.
Okay, I see that the
Chairman Winslow?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, this is Gina Iori. Would it be possible to email a copy of that to those of us who can't get the live stream?
Dr.
So we can
Letzelter?
follow along?
Not right now, this moment.
Right. I believe staff makes it available on the website.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay. Tranche 1 for the 2021 RFP took place this past Monday, and our findings are that the whole RFP was well run, and the auctions went off without a hitch. They were competitive, and we had adequate participation from a number of suppliers, and they resulted in prices that, most importantly, were consistent with market conditions. Next slide. As a refresher, Liberty's role, and my role in particular, is to review the tasks and materials related to communication with suppliers, review the prospective and actual bidder website access, monitor bidder eligibility, confirm the fees that NLX charges for their platform services, develop a power market assessment, and approve opening prices for the auctions, and finally monitor the auctions and confirm the results, specifically confirm the winners. Next slide. As an overview of the actual number of blocks, we had 8 total blocks. We had 4 risky blocks of 50.6 megawatts approximately each, totaling 202.4 megawatts. We had 2 blocks of MGS, that's medium general service, at 35.7 megawatts per block for a total of 71.4 megawatts. Large general service, or LGS, we had a single block of 7.1 megawatts, and 1 block of GSP, general service primary, was auctioned off, and that was 17.8 megawatts, all totaling almost 300 megawatts for Tranche 1. Next slide, please. You've seen this slide before, and I think we're finally in the last period to remind everyone where we are and where we've come from, because from now on, all of the auctions will be for risky for 24 months. We transitioned from 36 months to 24 months over a period of 3 years, and since 2020, we've been doing 24-month risky blocks. All other blocks for the customer classes that aren't risky are a single year, 12 months. So next slide, please. In terms of participation, looking at the number of bidders, for Tranche 1, we had a very good turnout, including 13 expressions of interest by prospective bidders, which is 1 more than we had in all of last year. And we had 9 eligible bidders, and all of them were actual bidders. So we had the same exact amount of eligible and actual bidders that we had for all of last year in 2020. When I say 2020, I mean the 2020 RFP. We're now in the 2021 RFP. Next slide, please. So the bid activity was similar to last year, and we had more bidders. So the previous slide shows a brief comparison of Tranche 1 of this year versus both tranches of last year. This particular slide shows Tranche 1 of this year versus Tranche 1 of last year. So we had 8 bidders for risky versus 7. We had 5 for LGS versus 3, and 5 for GSP versus 3. And the number of bids for each of these blocks was very similar. So it was a very good turnout, and we're happy with that. It definitely promoted competition. Next slide, please. Prior to the auctions, we worked with NLX, and we assessed current market conditions in PJM, and specifically in the DPL zone. We try to identify any market conditions that could lead to postponement of the auctions. Found none. We established opening prices for each auction, and I reviewed NLX's estimate of the range of expected winning prices for each block. We concluded that there was no reason to postpone the auctions, and they proceeded. Next slide, please. This is a view of the 2-year delivery period that is affected by by this week's auction, and that is from June 1st through May 31st over the course of 2 years. So, of course, that would be from 2021 to 2023. Over that period, the average prices for round-the-clock power for wholesale energy are 6.3% lower than they were year's Tranche 1 auction. The prices are also 3% lower than the Tranche 2 prices from last year that took place in January. So overall, again, wholesale energy prices have gone down, and that's just a continuing trend. Next slide. Gas sets the margin in PJM most of the time, and that gas-fired power plants are the ones running at the highest cost at any particular period, and that price becomes the locational marginal price that everyone gets paid. So gas price is therefore very important to power price. And unlike the power prices, which we saw go down in terms of the forward market for the 2-year period commencing this May, the gas prices have gone up fairly substantially. As compared to last year's Tranche 1, they're up almost 9%, and as compared to last year's Tranche 2, the gas prices are up over 13%. And this is an oddity. It's a phenomenon. It's very unique in terms of my experience, because typically when the price of gas falls, power prices fall. And when the price of gas goes up, power prices go up for the same forward-looking period. But that's not so at this particular time. And there are several reasons for that. But the biggest reason driving that is that there is a substantial decrease in expected load in PJM and in all North American markets and worldwide for that matter. And the price impact of electric load falling at that rate is greater than the upward pressure on prices you would get from natural gas prices. So the net of it is that even though gas prices are going to be higher, electric prices are actually going to be lower. And those are, of course, reflected in the prices that bidders would use to make their bids. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, gas sets the LMP, and I plotted gas versus power for 2 different periods. Last year's Tranche 2, which was January of 2020, and then Tranche 1 of this year, which just took place this week. And so the red lines are the energy price in dollars per megawatt hour. The black lines are gas prices in dollars per million BTU. And my statement here is that the energy price shapes are consistent with those of gas prices. And I want to make sure that everyone understands that that does comport with the fact that also the prices are headed in different directions. So you can see if you follow the 2 dashed lines which go together, they have a similar shape, and the 2 solid lines go together having a similar shape, even though the magnitudes, which are changing direction, are different. If you have any questions on that, I'd be glad to go into that further, but suffice it to say the market is making sense despite it seeming to be a little bit odd at the moment. Next slide, please. Of course, capacity prices are also an important component of bid price. And if you look at the way that risky prices have changed since 2019, risky pricing includes the average of 2 years of delivery of capacity services. So you can see from 2019 to 2020, capacity prices were a little bit higher. That's the dashed line for average. And then now they've dropped back down a little bit in the 2021 RFP. It's worth noting that the 2021 risky capacity price includes a 2022-23 delivery period proxy price. The actual auction in PJM for that delivery period has not taken place yet, and I believe it will take place in May. So the ultimate capacity price will be adjusted as an additional or a decreasing cost relative to this proxy price, depending on what the actual auction results are. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, the market conditions indicated that we should proceed, and we did, on schedule. The auctions went very well, and the NLX platform continues to perform as expected. And the auctions were competitive, resulting in winning bids that were consistent with the energy and capacity markets. and therefore Liberty recommends that the Commission approve these winning bids. And that's all I have for the public presentation. I'm glad to answer any questions, or if you decide to seek any information on the confidential components of this, we can do that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Ledzelter. Very well done. Commissioners, do you have any questions of the doctor? If I understand it correctly, the confidential parts of the presentation are basically the names of the bidding actors and prices and things of that nature, all of which will, as far as the price is concerned, they're sort of rolled up into what the result is under the risky category, all the categories. And those names of the bidders will be revealed at the end of the process, which I believe is going to be in March of 2021. Am I correct, Doctor?
I would ask either Pam or Jenny to confirm the actual date of disclosure, but ultimately they are disclosed.
Commissioners, does anyone want to make a motion to go into executive session?
Mr. Chairman, may I, before you go?
Sure.
Okay. Before you vote on whether to go into executive session, I have seen the numbers on the list, and I can attest that they are all in order. So, like last time, if you want to decline going into executive session and take my word for it, that's fine.
We're not going to take your word for it, Dr. Brewer.
I thought so.
There's no motion pending, and I would take that to mean that no commissioner wishes to go into executive session. So with thanks, Dr. Ledzelter, you are free to go about your business. And we'll look forward to hearing from you. And unless Ms. Board has some more information she wants to gather from the doctor.
You need to approve this.
Well, yeah, we're going to, but we'll usually let the witnesses go before we approve something.
They're good.
Okay? Okay, so I'd like to, thank you, sir. I'd like to make a motion that the auction was well run, that there were no hitches, that it was competitive because there was an adequate number of bidders, that the prices were consistent with market prices, and that the auction itself was run in a normal fashion without any problems, and that the commission should approve the results of the auction.
Commissioner Gray will second your motion.
Commissioner Gray got you, Joanne. He seconded.
That's fine.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
Only a comment to thank Liberty for the fine work that they're doing in the presentation.
Thank you, that's appreciated.
Okay, let's see. Commissioner Correa.
Aye.
Commissioner Conaway.
Aye.
Commissioner Drexler.
Aye.
Commissioner Gray.
Aye.
And I vote aye, and the motion carries. Commission would like to thank Ms. Board for her work, fine work on this matter. And is this your first time before us?
No, I did SOS and PCA last year.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And thank you, Ms. Knotts. Okay, we have a hearing scheduled that has nothing on that schedule. Do we have anybody from the public that's on the telephone that wishes to make any comment to the Public Service Commission? Dr. Brewer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. All I want to mention is that in the DP&L gas base rate case, docket number 20-0150, there was supposed to be a hearing tomorrow and on December 4th, and that has been canceled by your order that you just took a few minutes ago in order number 9693, where you'll directly hear the case on January 6th, 2021. The next commission is on Monday, December 14th, and that's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Thank you, Dr. Brewer. Commissioners, is there anything else? There's nothing left on the agenda, so I wish everyone safety out there, and thank you for